All right, welcome to all of our attendees and panelists, and thank you for joining us this afternoon for our Sandra Day O'Connor Scholars panel this afternoon, and appreciate everybody joining us. So just wanted to talk really briefly about how we will run this. This is a webinar, so perhaps some of the students who are probably now painfully familiar with much of how Zoom functions might be a little less familiar how it functions in the webinar setting. So in this setting, you students, attendees have the ability to chat with us or send chats, but you don't have the ability to video interact. So our plan will be, after we give a brief introduction and allow each of the panelists to introduce themselves, will be to encourage students to send in chat questions using the chat feature. And when you do so, I think we've set it up so that you can send a chat to the panelists. Myself and Professor Siegel will then be monitoring the chat feature, and we'll be looking for those to introduce questions to our panelists. And we'll see how effectively we are at managing all those various technologies as we give a start. So Professor Siegel, do you want to say a word or anything before we get started?
Just welcome everybody, and I want to again thank our panelists for their generosity in terms of their time and their willingness to share their experience and their thoughts with our current students. I think this will be a really exciting opportunity to kind of hear what it's like in practice, and I just encourage all the attendees to go ahead and forward questions through the chat function. Thanks.
All right, thank you. So I think rather than me introducing everyone, I think it might be easiest, we'll keep this as informal as possible. Just go around the room, if you were, the Zoom room, and allow all four of our panelists to introduce themselves. I think it would be helpful for our students to know when you graduated. They're all New England alums, so just get a little bit of perspective, how long you've been out in practice in your various areas. So I'm just going to go around the clock from the way I'm seeing the screen, and I have no idea how other people are seeing it, but the first one on my list is Bill Lane. So Bill, would you please introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Professor. This is Bill Lane. I work for CPCS, the Public Defender Agency in Massachusetts. I work in the Roxbury Defenders Unit, which is based in Roxbury, and I actually serve the West Roxbury, Dorchester, and Superior courts. I graduated in 2011. I took a number of classes from Professor Hansen, including mock trial. I came to law school specifically for criminal practice. Public defender was my goal when I entered law school from another career. So that was a formative experience for me, and it prepared me extremely well for criminal work that I do now. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. And you passed the bar in spite of taking a bunch of classes for me, so that's good to hear.
Yes.
Gary, do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Gray Brotherton, with Knox Godfrey here in Charlotte, North Carolina. 2019 graduate of New England Law. Had the great pleasure of taking several classes with Professor Siegel, including wrongful convictions. I'll just throw a plug out there for that. That was one of my favorite courses in law school. During law school, I was with Morrison Mahoney LLP as a law clerk, and then also with soon to be Chief Justice Kimberly Budd of the Mass SJC. Right now, just kind of general practitioner. I'm doing as much criminal as possible, as much as going on, and then a lot of civil work too. So thanks again for having me, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Gray. Thank you very much. Wendy Hansen, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Wendy Hansen. I graduated in 2015. I right now work for Foley Foley, which is an employment law office, and we do some litigation, but mostly compliance. And so a lot of time we're advising clients on how to prepare and avoid people suing them, which is a little bit more pleasant of a conversation to have once the carcass is dead. So it's been really interesting. COVID has definitely affected a lot of our work, but and I also did mock trial at New England, so I definitely put in a plug for that. If you have signed up for the tryouts, it's a really great experience and gives you a lot of practical knowledge in the courtroom.
All right, thanks very much, Wendy. Lauren Fackler.
I graduated from New England in 2016. While I was there, I worked at Mealy Porter as a paralegal. I attended evening classes at New England. And then upon graduation, I started as an associate. So I've been at Mealy Porter since 2013, almost 8 years. And I primarily work on employment law cases. The firm does insurance defense work. So we also do other types of insurance, but I mostly work on employment practices, liability, insurance defense.
All right, thank you very much, Lauren. So you can see that we have a group of panelists that have varying experiences, varying different areas of practice, varying locations, as well as varying times since they've been out of law school. And our assumption is, and I'm sure that they'll be able to share with us, that regardless of how long they've been out, all of them in their practice have been impacted by the current pandemic and the way that the practice has shifted as a result of that. So we're going to spend some time delving into that. Now, I will tell the panelists, I believe, I can't tell from my list, but my assumption is that the vast majority of our students who are attending today are first-year law students. So one of the things that they will be looking at very soon is applying for summer internships, summer fellowships after their first year of law school. So I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative and ask the first question of each of the three of you, or excuse me, each of the four of you, to go back and imagine yourself back as a first-year law student. And I know for some that's a little farther back than others, but it's not too far in your history. What if you imagine yourself now getting ready to start applying for internships, fellowships, and wondering what skills might be particularly necessary or useful, or some challenges that you might face in a world that is distance like we are seeing it, what would you tell yourself as a first-year law student to prepare for this upcoming summer internship and fellowship opportunities? And anybody who wants, you can all unmute panelists. So anybody who wants to jump on that question first, feel free, and I'll mute myself so that the four of you can share.
I'll start out because we do have an active intern program at CPCS, and in my office particularly, we get a very steady and strong flow of New England law students as well as Northeastern students and some BU students. But right now we're in a hiatus. We just simply don't have an office. That's going to be a challenge. And I think a constructive answer would be to find a mentor. I would suggest, thinking back to my law school experience, find an upperclassman who's already connected to the agency you want to connect with, or and network your way to what will be a remote internship. I can always provide contact information after this event to anyone who wants to know who to contact as our intern point person at various offices.
All right, others?
Our office is open. A lot of people are choosing to work from home. I've been working from home, but it is open for people who do need to go in for whatever reason, or if they just need a quiet place to work, or whether to meet clients. We don't have any interns working right now. We usually do have a few though. And I imagine by the time summer comes around, we may be able to host a few people in person. It's very hard, I think, to have an intern remote. I think you get a lot from the internship experience just being there and not necessarily working with one attorney, but being able to help out a bunch of attorneys. And I think if you're remote, it's hard to get that, you know, can you just come watch this deposition with me, or can you come take notes on this phone call? It's hard to pull someone to do that if you're remote. So I think it'll definitely be a challenge. Finding an office that is open where you can come in person for an internship, but also where attorneys will be there and enough attorneys there to make the internship meaningful.
Yeah, I kind of mirror what you guys have said. I think a lot of times it's probably best to be as proactive as possible. And if you do end up getting an internship, being proactive about seeking work. The only way that I have ever really either gotten a job or an internship, it's all through the connections that I've had. So reach out to your professors, reach out to upperclassmen, reach out to people you know in the community. You know, the word of mouth by who you know and by association is probably going to be your best avenue as far as being able to secure an internship. And then once you do, if you do end up having to do it remotely, just being really proactive about seeking out help. Because, you know, a lot of times many of the attorneys' plates are really full and they're not going to think to have, you know, to talk to the intern or reach out to them for work. So be proactive in seeking that out as well once you do get an internship.
Yeah, and I'll just add, thinking about what you can do now, I would really focus on your LRW classes. I hope that's what it's still called, but you know, every interview conversation I had about a position, it was all about the writing sample and my LRW grades. As an intern and even a young associate, a lot of your responsibility is going to be research and writing, drafting. So, you know, I would really, really pay attention to your LRW. I know my first semester, I kind of treated it as like the least important substantive kind of class. And I think it's the exact opposite. Obviously knowing the material is important, but those are really the skills that you're going to use in an internship and even, you know, when you graduate and pass the bar. So I would really, really focus on that. And the research techniques that we were taught about how to use Westlaw and Nexus and those kind of things, I use those every day. So I would focus on those.
So I just want to have one follow-up with that. You all mentioned, you know, kind of networking and the challenges. I'm wondering, you know, given the fact that while certainly physical location in an office is optimal, I think that, you know, for many of us looking in the next weeks and months down the road, it's probably unlikely that that's going to be an option in many situations. So I'm wondering if you all would see greater opportunities for students to perhaps reach out for internships and placements outside of the geographic area of Boston. Do you see that as a potential that frees students up in any way to maybe cast the net a little bit wider or broader in who they might reach out to for networking opportunities and offer themselves up for some of these opportunities, since they're not necessarily bound by the geographic limitations of Boston if in fact they're going to be working remotely? Does anybody have thoughts on that?
I hadn't considered it. It's a terrific idea. I hadn't thought about sort of decoupling yourself geographically, but now as I think about it, I think it's a terrific idea. I think you should use all the networking tools you possibly can. Everybody on here should be on LinkedIn as a JD candidate, so that you can easily resume your targets. Yeah, start your professional practices now. Networking will be important for the rest of your career.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's very easy to decouple yourself from the geographic area, especially depending on the type of law that you do. Obviously, if it's you know, more specific to a state law like criminal law, but yeah, expand your net as vast and wide as you possibly can. It wouldn't be a problem or wouldn't be a disservice to you being able to find an opportunity.
Can I just put in a plug for something that students may not have thought about along those lines of what Professor Hansen was suggesting, is that I've recently gotten communication from a student who's secured an internship during the academic year, so in the spring semester, far away, you know, in another state, but it's in an area that the student is very interested in, and I don't know if it's necessarily where the student wants to ultimately practice. But that's the kind of opportunity that now I think students should really be thinking about pursuing, not just for the summer, but even during the semester. And possibly some of those can be arranged to be with academic credit. But again, I think since most internships, even where you live, are likely to be remote anyway, there's absolutely no reason not to be seeking that further. I wanted to just ask a question of all the panelists that might kind of help frame students thinking about sort of what the summer experience would be like. How has your sort of day-to-day practice experience changed since, you know, February, March of this year? I mean, obviously you're doing things remotely, but kind of what does that actually mean in terms of the day-to-day work that you do, in terms of client interactions, in terms of the kinds of things that your firm or your office has you tasked with? I think that would be helpful for students.
Well, I'll start again, I guess. This is a very difficult time to be observing the system as a newcomer to it. I'm speaking of the criminal justice system now, because that's my sole area of practice, because it is so bizarrely upside down that there's no link to reality. And if you were to normalize to the current situation, you would be unequipped if and when we gradually transition back to what it used to be when we were all in courtrooms together. I'm shocked by how much I miss a courtroom, not only for the relationships which I enjoy with colleagues on both sides of the bar, and with court personnel and even judges. I miss that enormously, but what's even weirder is how strange we're calling in by telephone. You can be in your car and be speaking to a judge making a substantive argument about a discovery motion, for example. Relatively minor things like that are all handled by telephone. I would never be in my car, and I'd always be on the video, not just on the phone. That's my practice, but this is the world we live in. You've got so much freedom. I've seen professionalism stretched to its limits with advocates who show up on camera with a flannel shirt, maybe ripped at the collar, because that's what they're most comfortable in their home office. That's not acceptable to me. It's not acceptable to my clients who would see me in that sort of condition and see my level of unprofessionalism. So there's a whole different, it's very strange. And that's why I emphasize mentorship. You need to find someone who can say, this isn't how it usually works. Here's how the system is designed to work, or what the system needs to achieve, no matter what form it finally takes.
My day's been very different working remotely. In employment law, we found that since a lot of people are losing their jobs or have family members or household members that are, in the beginning, people were very anxious for settlements, and we were very busy, because whereas before they were willing to litigate the case for a few months or a few years, now they're like, oh no, we need the money now. And they were willing to take a lower amount. But it was hard for us because, everyone's coming to us saying, let's talk, and we have to make time for all those people. What was helpful was that the courts we have cases all over the country. So in general, the courts were all shut down, and that slowed our lawsuits. But everything that was just in the threat and litigation stage or with an agency, we were still moving. And we still had lawsuits that were coming back to us and wanting to talk settlement. We also have a lot of people a lot of our clients, because they weren't in the office, they weren't getting that, day-to-day social interaction. So when we picked up the phone to talk to them, they would want to talk for much longer, because we were the only people who were calling them. And so everything was just taking a lot longer to do because we had more work, but also, and it was nice to talk to people because we weren't talking to people either. But it was just, it's a lot. So our days were much longer than before. And also because you're at home and, you can go have lunch and you can go let the dog out, but at the same time you start earlier and you end later because you don't have a commute and you had more work to do than before.
Yeah, I second all of what Lauren said. Employment law, I think, from COVID-19 has been a world that's been totally rocked. And especially anybody who's been working in human resources or as a controller in any company has had to really man the deck on, doing all of these reductions in force and furloughs and what benefits go along with that and making sure that it's legal. And, I'm more on the compliance side and less of the litigation side. But I think even though, March and April were probably the most crazy time that I've ever worked, we were working at least 10 to 12 hour days, just answering people's questions. But it's kind of like the static that's stuck around. It's probably not as busy as it was in the beginning, but it's kind of just the level of water is a little bit higher. And I think that level of anxiety of, especially from, your client's perspective of not knowing what to expect and not knowing what to come, as an attorney, you're that person that becomes their fail-safe. They want to know what they should anticipate and how they should plan their process going forward so their business can stay viable. And so you have to, even though you have sometimes no idea what you're doing, you have to kind of pretend like you do know, and do the best you can and stay on top of the new laws. I think for us, what was the biggest issue was when the FFCRA, the new leave law that came down along with the CARES Act. And so there was just so much content that you had to kind of sift through without regulations having been promulgated. And so you're kind of trying to take interpretation based on what past experience has been from other laws. And it's a lot of piecemeal work. It's very intellectually stimulating, but it's also incredibly overwhelming. And I think you do have to do a very good job of setting your boundaries really well with remote work. It does kind of has a tendency to permeate your existence. And so if you don't set well-defined time, I'm not going to check my email after this time, or just let clients know if it's an emergency, call me. Otherwise, I'm not going to see your email until tomorrow morning. I think that's probably good to set boundaries, and especially when you work remotely.
I probably have a unique perspective because I graduated in 2019, took the bar in Massachusetts and got my license there, sworn in November, and then my wife and I decided to move back to Charlotte, where we're from, and I had to do the UBE transfer process, which took like 6 or 7 months. So I really started practicing in the middle of this. I think I went to 2 hearings in March. When I wasn't even licensed, I was basically just kind of observing with some of the partners at our firm. And it's obviously not what I expected, as someone who was really looking forward to getting some litigation experience and loves being in a courtroom and things like that. It's been unfortunate, so hopefully by the time all of you graduate, this will be a memory, but it's just really unfortunate in my experience. And, hopefully we get back into courtrooms soon. We've been doing everything WebEx for the courts, and are actually starting back with jury trials in the end of November. And I was in the courtroom the other day just for something else and saw how they had it arranged. And it's like plexiglass in between all the in the jury box between all the jurors. And there's all kind of questions about whether the jurors are going to feel comfortable and all that. So it's obviously a lot of new different things to think about. But it's not what I expected, of course, but we're making the best of it. I'll also say, I think being technologically savvy is a marketable skill. I assume, everyone that's here on the panel and the attendees can attest to that. But, I've kind of become the IT guy around here for a lot of the older partners and attorneys. And, I'll get added to things on my calendar. Hey, I need you to set this up, that kind of stuff. So, moving forward, interviews and things like that, maybe for the summer, if you are looking at somewhere that may be doing in person, that's just another skill you can throw out there. I've really been wearing many hats since this started. So it's something to think about.
Excellent, thanks. So we have some questions from our attendees. I'm going to go to a few of those. I'll start with one. We'll try to get to all of them. I was just answering them, not necessarily in a particular order, but we'll try to get to all of them. Now, one student has asked whether we think the pandemic will lead to permanent changes in your area of practice, or that things will just return to the former status quo. So I think that's a really interesting question that all of us, even in academia, are wondering about as well. But so what do you see? Do you see some changes, efficiencies, differences that are going to be permanent as a result of this? Or do you think it's just going to be something in 2, 3, or 5 years we just look back on and which hope never happens again? Thoughts on that?
Well, I'll start again, just to continue the pattern. I hope some things remain, because we've really been forced to examine the system, what works and what doesn't, and why we do things the way we do. I think before COVID, we minimized the value of time and for our criminal clients. Criminal clients were, I think, regarded as portable, in such a way that judges could determine, the course of a case more so than, say, a defendant would. I think that's flipped not only because of the heavy pressure on the system by the docket, but also because there are, we realize that defendants matter, their health matters when they're in custody. Judges spent a great deal of time in the last 8 months, including the very highest justices in our state at the SJC, reviewing petition after petition after petition for release from pretrial custody because of COVID risks. I think custody has been placed in a better perspective. I think attendance at court has been placed in a better perspective. People can check in by phone or video and be fully apprised of their case. Those sorts of things are very positive. What I don't know what the future of is juries, and that's such a vast area that I'm not even gonna touch on that, because I could go on for a long time about my concerns. But I hope a lot of our efficiencies, technologies remain, and I hope we have changed permanently how we view and value defendants and their participation in their own cases.
Others? What are some things you think that might be more long lasting, if any, from what you're seeing so far? Lauren, what do you think? What are you seeing?
In terms of employment law, I think it will be interesting going forward, and especially in the next few months after it has been a full year, to see what types of claims have changed. We certainly have cases now with COVID that are COVID related, and some people are in person, and if you have a positive test and you're a contact of someone else, like things like that, we've had those types of cases. But in terms of like sexual harassment cases, you would think those went down if a lot more people are working remotely. And they were on the rise with the Me Too movement for the longest time. So it would be interesting to see if those go down, or if they're going to be stronger now because you're not in person. Maybe you're being sexually harassed through email or through some other type of permanent document system. And I think it'll be very interesting in the employment context to see how those trends change. In terms of day-to-day though, I think that the offices, at least for our office, will be remote. I think that we will definitely have a permanent office, but I think that more attorneys will take advantage of working from home, just because you are able to successfully do it. It does decrease the overhead. And if you do need to go in person, I think that it will be more of sharing desks instead of having a permanent desk in the future.
Yeah, I think too, because our office was already kind of working somewhat remote prior to COVID, so the transition was a little bit easier. But I agree, I think most people and most employers are likely going to be moving to remote because it does reduce their overhead amount. And in a way, COVID-19 is kind of good job security for lawyers, because it has kind of brought people to a more compliance perspective when it comes to managing their business. There's such a wide range of employers. You could have a liquor store that has 5 employees, or, a Fortune 500 company that has 1,000 employees. And then you have a bunch of people in between. And usually compliance and HR are the last group to develop for any sort of company. And COVID-19 has kind of forced that hand a little bit more. So I think there will be probably, as far as business organization goes, which will affect our legal practice in almost every aspect, there's going to be more of a need to want to follow or understand the legal implications of decisions that they make, because you want to be able to protect yourself from litigation and from people suing you.
Yeah, I would agree. I think many of the things that this has forced us to do will likely remain. Like Bill, I think the big question for litigators is jury trials. I mean, what is this going to look like? And there's potential substantive effects on the jury trial system and things like that. But day-to-day client intake stuff, I think everyone has seen that kind of stuff can be done effectively remotely. Even, like I was saying earlier, the motion hearings and things like that, we've seen that they can be handled remotely. So I think, and I hope that some of that remains. It's in a lot of ways more efficient. But the thing that really gives me pause is the jury trial kind of context of that. I just don't really see a way of that working smoothly. There's a lot of hiccups even with these hearings and things like that, but to do a full-blown jury trial with evidence and all that kind of stuff is, I hope that, goes back to the pre-COVID kind of system.
Can I throw in something maybe to point it directly back at someone else who might be thinking about what it's going to look like when they take the bar and are licensed in 2 or 3 years? It's very hard to see where we'll be then, but it's very possible that you're not going to be able to market yourself in person, go to a firm, meet the all the partners or the associate coordinator, the summer associate coordinator, and interact and engage in that sort of way. You're going to have to be a virtual presence. The skills that you develop now and the technology, I will confess that if I didn't have a very skilled wife who knows how to get me on all various platforms and document sharing websites and so on, I would be lost. You guys are probably much more facile at that, and I would recommend you really market that, your ability to be either in person at a firm, if the risk returns to that level, or fully functional in a remote setting as well. So you're going to have to market yourself very deftly for the time and the skills that are needed for the moment, because that might change in 6 months or 9 months.
Thanks. Thank you very much. So I've got another one here from a student who's asking, with respect specifically to summer internship type tasks, what kind of, in kind of a remote setting, what kind of tasks could you imagine a summer intern performing in the office where you work, in the area where you work? And we'll change it up and we'll start with Gray this time. What do you think, Gray?
Yeah, so going back to what I said at the beginning, I think research and writing, that's kind of something that can be done anywhere. You lose the ability to walk down the hall and maybe ask a specific question or something like that, but that may be a positive that you look it up on your own and do some research and find it out that way. I think that would be a plus. Those were in my summer positions and law clerk and things like that. That was when I really got excited and learned a lot. Is, hey, here's the summary judgment issue. I need you to research this and bring me a first draft of that. So that kind of stuff, I think, it would be great. And I'm not really sure there would be a detriment and maybe even a benefit.
Yeah, I agree. I think probably research and writing are the best things that, as an attorney, I would like an intern to do for me whenever I get really busy or overwhelmed, and if it's a little bit of a step too far, you kind of have to go down a wormhole to find it. That's going to be really the research assignments that you'll likely get. And writing it, usually a brief summary, something that you could put into a document, whether it's going to a client or being filed as a motion for court.
I agree with research and writing, and I also agree that LRW is very important. When we look at resumes, we do ask for a writing sample, and so if you are applying for a summer internship position, I would definitely try to get a good grade on that first and second paper. That way you can present one of them to potential employers. I also think that it's important to apply as early as possible. Like has been mentioned before, because you could help during the spring semester if you're not too overwhelmed with the coursework, or if you're going part-time. I think it's definitely beneficial to say you're available as soon as possible, because people need help all year round, not just during the summer.
Well, I just asked my office's intern coordinator if we had an intern because I needed help, and the answer was no, unfortunately, at this moment. But we're on hiatus on that program. But we can put interns to work in 1,000 ways. I will fourth the endorsement for LRW. When I was in law school, I remember in a summer internship with another fellow who was from Harvard Law. Could not write to save his life, Harvard notwithstanding. New England has a particular, New England stands out for a couple things in my mind. One is, I'll say three. The first is mock trial, one of the best programs I can imagine in law school. a law student with litigation in mind ever participating in. Secondly is the clinical program that Professor Engler helps run and places these interns in various offices. But thirdly, LRW. 3 semesters of LRW is frankly not enough, but it's more than anybody else in the city that I know of teaches their law students, and they're extremely good at it. Your second year, first semester appellate argument will be a highlight in your life, I suspect. It's a big deal. It's a big moment, and it makes you feel like you've arrived in law because you're in a real courtroom. Hopefully that will continue in 2021. I don't know what they're doing this semester. I doubt that they're in a real courtroom, unfortunately. It's a wonderful program. Focus on it like all the others have emphasized.
All right, thank you. So Professor Siegel, I'm not sure if you have the function to see any of these questions as well, so I don't want to take up all the questioning here.
No, that's okay. I can see a little bit, but I wanted to just sort of maybe go back to something that some of the panelists mentioned earlier that might actually be something for students to consider as they get into their interviewing phase or contacting prospective placements for internships. And that is kind of the developing sense of professionalism in this kind of remote environment. That I think, and I'd be curious to hear the panelists' thoughts on both sort of what they're seeing as kind of the expected levels of professionalism in sort of remote interaction, whether it's with other attorneys or the court or judges in arguments or clients. And also, I mean, have they observed things that they sort of think, maybe it's kind of like the flannel shirt standard or whatever, but that kind of stand out to them as like this isn't sufficiently professional? And are there things that they think students should be aware of if the expectation is they may well be doing remote interviews or remote, Zoom interviews for possible internships? Are there kind of things that would stand out to a prospective interviewer for internship candidates?
Yeah, somebody else may have different opinion, but I would treat it just like in-person stuff. I mean, I've been on calls where, with judges, stuff with the court and yeah, people not dressed, not no suit top, that kind of thing. And, whether the judge would admit it or not, I think it does have an effect. And if I'm interviewing someone for a position and see that they, might be in their house, but they took the time to put on a suit and tie or something like that, and still observe, kind of the formalities that you want to see that demonstrate that you're interested and you're willing to take the time and things like that to get a position. I think it's extremely important to not, give them a reason to say, hey, this kind of stuck out to me. Why were they doing that? Just everything that you would think to do in an in-person setting, I would definitely treat it like that.
Yeah, I agree with that too. And especially if you do interviews, be aware of your camera angle.
Yeah.
Make sure, as you can tell, you can see my living room, but I cleaned it up before I turned my camera on. So that way you wouldn't see my laundry, right? So I think that would be something similar. Just, prepare yourself ahead of time, just like you would if you were going to an internship. You would, when you go to an interview, you always want to be like 15 minutes early and make sure you're not huffing and puffing up the stairs because you're running late. Same thing with a Zoom call. Probably a little bit more Instagram influencer type tips, but nonetheless, be aware of, where your surrounding is. Make sure you have the space to do it. Make sure it's quiet enough. We're not going to have any distractions. If you have a dog, maybe have someone to go babysit them.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I've heard a dog bark in the middle of my Zoom call, which is fine. But if it's an interview process and if it's something more formal, especially if you're trying to establish relationship with a client, you want to make it from your end as formal as possible. Let them dictate how informal it can be.
I agree. I would just try to be as professional as possible, understanding that there are distractions and you may have dogs or kids or other family members around, but I would just try to, especially for that 1 hour for the interview slot, try to kick everyone out of the house and make it as quiet as possible. Still dress up in a suit, make sure your background is professional. And I think that once you are hired though, there is more grace given and People are more understanding if you have to go to, attend to something, or if you have somebody crying in the background, like a baby or something. They're more understanding. Even with clients and on calls, I feel like now people understand that you're working from home and you're balancing, and you don't really necessarily have a separate office. So people have been giving more grace lately than before.
I won't repeat anything that anybody said because I agree with all of it. I'll just add a little something that remember who your audiences are at every point in a task. For example, when you're in court on Zoom, it's always your client most of the time. So they're seeing what you look like. They're seeing how you respect your profession and them, how seriously you take them when you show up with that casual shirt, with a mess behind you, so on. You've got an audience of the judge, you've got an audience of the record, you've got an audience of a lot of things in court. A lot of people are hearing you, and what you say matters. Perhaps the most important message you're sending is to your client, especially in a criminal setting. A lot of lawyers here on this call aren't quite as client intensive. Their work doesn't go there. In the criminal setting, though, your client is watching because they see other attorneys. I think that guy's got a very good attorney. Listen to that guy go. He looks like he was put together, with rivets. You're competing for your client's loyalty and their faith, frankly. So keep that in mind. It's not only judges and everybody else who's judging you, but your clients are as well.
Excellent, thank you. So I'm going to go back to a couple of questions that I'm seeing on the question and answer forum. One asks, given the pandemic situation, and I know it's hard to predict all this, but from your own perspectives, do you foresee any certain areas, either in terms of new legal fields that will increase in demand? It sounds like from both Lauren and Wendy that employment law might be the jackpot all of a sudden. Who knew that employment law would be so exciting and cutting edge? But and I'm going to expand that question just a little bit, both in terms of fields of law, but also skill sets that you see as, in addition to what you've already reflected, that are pretty typical, some skill sets or areas of law that you see expanding in the future, either in the current phase of a pandemic or even in a post-pandemic situation. So I'll start with Lauren, since employment law seems to be one area. Do you see others, Lauren, from your perspective?
I think definitely employment law is increasing, as well as other insurance type of claims, professional claims. I think that it's important to tell, if you're interviewing, that you're interested in all different types of law, and that you're willing to help out and learn in lots of different areas. In terms of new, I guess it's important, definitely, as has been said before, to market yourself as very technologically savvy and explain that you're willing to learn any new platform. There's tons of platforms out there for video conferencing and document sharing, things like that. So I think it's very important to say that you're adept at this number, but you're willing to learn any other ones too.
Yeah, I also second the employment law thing, and that's, just because Lauren and I see it all the time, but employment law was already kind of a constantly changing, very responsive to political issues type field. It's very, you could see almost the polarization of conservative versus liberal within the laws themselves. And so COVID-19 has only increased that changing rate. Definitely a lot of more OSHA claims, so probably a lot more safety and security when it comes to stuff like that, because employers do have a duty to mitigate the risk of infectious diseases or spreading it. So that's probably going to be another thing, because COVID-19 is probably not the last pandemic we'll have. And I think kind of making yourself, what is a skill set that would be really good is empathy, and being empathetic to your clients and understanding kind of their perspective and where they're coming from. When you're dealing with a business that, started from scratch with a mom and pop store 50 years ago, and they've grown and they've built their business on their own backs, and then they have to do this layoff, for 50 employees, it's heartbreaking. And so maybe understanding and not necessarily being so, calculating with cool numbers and spitting out legalese, but being empathetic and understanding and trying to help them be strategic, the best way that they can manage that.
Well, I'll throw in here. I mean, just off the top of my, I think of this not so much as a medical crisis we're in as a financial crisis. What we're in is a sudden depression, or at least a recession after the bounce recovers. So the fields of law that are going to be important in that sort of a situation, COVID or not, whatever the cause of the depression or recession might be, it's going to create things like bankruptcy opportunities. There's opportunities in commercial real estate, probably on the downside, because commercial real estate is, I don't know, I come from a different, my background includes a number of years as a journalist, and part of that period was I was a business journalist. So I follow things like commercial real estate, or I used to. I don't know what the future holds. Downtown is I don't know if any of you have been downtown Boston recently. I live near downtown, so I was walking there the other day. At the moment, I'm actually at a remote location in Vermont, but I was in Boston, and there's no reality that we can connect to from our former lives. Office space is empty. My wife is has space in the Post Office Square buildings there, right along the square. Some of the highest value real estate in the city, in a city that's among the highest in the country, and it's literally empty. Not a single soul is allowed in the building. She's on the 6th floor of a 12-story building. This is not a joke. People are gonna. I'm surprised there aren't those safety guards on ledges all over the city, because I can see a lot of desperation out there coming very soon. Commercial real estate, landlord tenant. You're seeing that in the headlines. Watch the headlines and become a futurist. Spin that headline out to where you think it might go, and you're going to kind of see the lay of 2021, 2022, and hopefully not too far beyond that, but that's where the opportunities might lie.
Yeah, that last point was something I was going to say. My bosses here, knowing I wanted and needed some litigation experience, landlord tenant was kind of one of the only things that was going. So I have taken several of those on both sides. And, I don't know if that's a permanent thing, but it's certainly something to think about. Another increased area that we've seen is wills and estates. I don't know if it's people realizing their mortality or things like that, but we've seen a huge increase in people wanting to get their affairs in order, or whatever you want to call it, but and obviously the business related stuff that Bill spoke to. I mean, I would agree with his characterization of what we're going through, and I think the impacts will be felt for a long time, even past when you all graduate. So that's certainly something to think about.
Thank you. So I have one here, and it's in the employment law context, but I think I'm going to try to broaden the question out just a little bit, asking about, looking in terms of entry-level work. Kind of a question would be maybe a little bit outside the criminal area, but in the civil side of things, whether you would recommend perhaps starting a practice in a firm, a larger size firm that might be more general in nature, but if you have a particular area of interest, whether it's employment law or something else, would you recommend trying to enter into a firm that perhaps maybe a little bit smaller, that is more boutique in the kind of area of practice you're interested in? Is there one direction that's better than the other, or from your perspective, what might you advise a student who's considering, large firm practice versus smaller firm, more specialized practice in an area that they have a particular interest in? Or are you telling them just take whatever is going to come across your plate and be happy with it? Wendy, what do you think? I'll start with you, because I know you've had a couple of different firms that you've practiced in since you graduated.
I would say probably it kind of cuts both ways. I mean, sure, you could go to a bigger firm that has more generalized practice, but if you work with one partner, you're probably going to be, stuck with that type of practice. So it really depends on the culture of the firm itself, even if it is boutique, because the small firm that I work at really does focus on employment law. But because it's small, you actually do get a wide variety of practice, because a lot of times people will come to you for other questions. And so I think what you want to do is unless you're like, dead set on a certain type of law when you come out of law school, keep your options open as much as possible and go to the place where you think you'll get the most experience. Some smaller firms practice general law. If you can go to a bigger firm, that would also be a really good experience. Being able to do something outside of that even just gives you more rounded perspective as an attorney. And I think kind of, even if, you know, you don't end up going into that type of specialized law and go into something else, it still rounds you out very well in your experience.
I didn't start looking for employment law. I went to undergrad for biochemistry, and I did the intellectual property concentration at New England. But I had a classmate that was working at this law firm and said that they needed a paralegal in employment law. And I was working at Dana-Farber at the time, and I asked if they had any space in their legal department, and they said no, it's very small. And they had one intern already from New England who was in that position. So that I knew that I needed a legal position. And I interviewed at this firm, and I really liked the people. I didn't think I would stay very long since I was interested in intellectual property and not employment, and they don't do any intellectual property here. But I just liked the environment and the people and the work. Employment law is very interesting to me. I mean, you literally can't make up the cases. They're just crazy. You can't make up the facts, and every day you get a new case, and it's just unbelievable. So I just kind of fell into it. So I would say just, you know, definitely keep your net very, very open, and you may be surprised that you may love what, you know, you find, even though it's not what you were set on originally.
I wanted to just follow up something that I guess both Wendy and Lauren mentioned about sort of being open to different experiences in, you know, in even if you think you're interested in a particular area. I would, you know, and obviously I've been out of law school and practicing for a few decades, but I would really encourage the students who are thinking about it, in whatever firm or whatever practice setting you get into, to try and seek different kinds of experiences, even within that, you know. So if you know your heart's set, I mean, like for Bill, your heart's set on criminal practice or being a public defender, if you get an internship in an office like that, you know, and you're helping with trial preparation, ask to help on an appeal, or ask to, you know, help in a preliminary hearing. I mean, it's sort of that every additional experience that you get, even if it's in the same area of law, makes you a more effective lawyer. I mean, there's, you know, you're a much better trial lawyer if you've read a transcript writing an appeal or preparing an appeal to see all the things that go wrong. And the same for, you know, landlord tenant. Trying to negotiate a lease is a really good way to understand how, you know, how things can go wrong at the other end of it. And I wonder if there were experiences that any of you have had, maybe because you've had to be remote, where you've sort of gotten involved with some other part of your firm's or your organization's work because, you know, because you could, and they said, listen, could you help out with this webinar, or could you help out with this presentation to somebody, or could you help out with, you know, to present our firm to a client, you know, because you could.
I think for me, one of the biggest things was a field of law that I didn't want to get into, but was forced into nonetheless, was the PPP loans that had just come out with the CARES Act. That was probably the biggest confusion, mess up, you know, ambiguity that I think a lot of businesses dealt with. And even though it didn't necessarily deal with employment law, so many of our clients had come to us and asked us these questions. And even though it wasn't necessarily our expertise, we felt kind of obligated to be able to give them something because their lenders didn't know anything. The lenders don't know how to read regulations, you know, coming down from a certain agency. And so we had to do a lot of interpretation there. And so it was nice to be able to kind of expand my skill set and not necessarily have to rely on past research that I had done and really dig in deep and kind of understand. And then your clients are so much happier because they feel like they have more of a one-stop shop, right? They don't have to go to this attorney to talk about this thing or this attorney to talk about the other thing. So that was definitely a very COVID-19 related imposition, I should say.
I can jump in real quick because I'll endorse employment law as an amazing resource. Now, I'm sitting just a few feet away from my wife, who's an entrepreneur, runs a small company. And if she hadn't had a really competent and employment lawyer who helped her with the PPP and everything else, the COVID precautions, she would be up the creek. So the employment law area is really vital right now.
Yeah, I'll say, Professor Siegel, getting, at the heart of your question, you described a situation that happened to me. I just submitted a record on appeal for a case that I had no involvement with until I was asked to help set up some remote stuff. And now I'm drafting the record on appeal and hammering out the issues and things like that. So the nature of our practice is a general practice. We want to be your lawyer no matter what your situation is. So that lends itself to me getting involved in kind of whatever pops up. And I'm, I kind of like Bill, I went to law school thinking I want to do criminal defense. That's what my dad does. That was all I wanted. And then the opportunity with Morrison Mahoney in Boston came up through law review, which is another important aside. I would definitely check out law review and try to get on. But Morrison does insurance defense, and I, got involved researching and writing a bunch of those issues, and now I do a lot of plaintiffs work too. And I thought I was kind of one-track mind, tunnel vision until I experienced something else. So you never know what can happen. And, I'm lucky to be in a situation now where I get to experience all kind of things. And some of it, I don't really like, I found out, but a lot of it, it's helping to make me a well-rounded lawyer, thinking on your feet and being able to logically work your way through things that you maybe don't know everything about. I think that's an important skill, especially for anyone that wants to be a litigator.
That's a really valuable theme that all of you have weaved through your answers there about being flexible and open to opportunities that you might not have anticipated, and recognizing that hopefully the skills that you're learning in law school and your experiences in the clinics and the internships and the fellowships, you'll recognize that the basic skill sets that lawyers possess, many of them are transferable regardless of the area of practice. Problem solving, analyzing, empathizing, relating to clients, and those kinds of skills are across the board. So I've got one question here, and I'm going to title this maybe as looking at the time, we're about to 4 o'clock. We're certainly welcome for other questions, but I'm going to call this the zombie apocalypse question here, for lack of a better term. We've got the election coming around the corner, and we're all maybe a little bit anxious about how things might look in the future based upon who would have predicted how 2020 would have played out. But the question is, politics are swinging wildly in unpredictable directions. There's a possibility for general strikes, civil unrest. We know hopefully that doesn't happen. But what advice would you give a new budding young attorney in this brave new world of uncertainty? How does a new attorney navigate this world that we find ourselves in that's so unpredictable, that seems to be swinging back and forth in a lot of different areas, and we don't know what the future holds? So in your positions now of relatively recent out of law school to a number of years out of law school, what are you going to tell a new soon to be new lawyer or on how to prepare for the uncertainty that the future definitely is going to hold for all of us?
Well, I'm eager to answer this question. I say look at it as an opportunity. I mean, there's I think a special dignity that comes with the profession of being a lawyer, of almost, and I say this jokingly, but I mean this, like a consigliere for the mafia, right? You get to be this advisor, you get to be this level head, you get to be this person that has a level of pragmatism that I think helps people just make decisions. And it doesn't matter what type of law you practice, people come to you for advice as to how things are going to shake down. And so even though there is a lot of civil unrest and a lot of uncertainty going on, that is an opportunity for you to even hone in your skill set even more, to kind of be this lightning rod of reason and of being able to bring people down off the ledge. I always one thing I've always noticed when attorneys are being interviewed on, news stations is the newscaster will always want to bait the question and try to get the lawyer to give some sort of political opinion or give their own personal opinion. And almost every single attorney is so good at not taking the bait. And I think it's mostly because they want to come from a place of, unbiased, more pragmatic, just kind of looking at both sides of the issue and being able to be, you know, a voice of reason. And so I think it gives you as an attorney and as a young attorney to be able to be that for other people when they so desperately are going to need it.
I agree with that entirely. You are in the first year of your accession to sort of a very special, I'm trying to find the right word, fellowship that will find its way to leadership. Lawyers are always, because of what they do and how they do it, they've always found their way to leadership positions in our culture, in our society. We are very much right now in a position, in my opinion, where the world is very much like a snow globe. When you shake a snow globe, the flakes never land in the same place. They land somewhere random, but they can be guided. If you live in that world, you can fashion the world that results. You as attorneys are being trained to do that. Take that very seriously. Adopt that mantle. Realize that you can be a leader in whatever you do, not only in your profession. At the professional level, that's I am at a loss to predict how lawyers will be viewed in a culture of 10 years from now, but I do know they'll be leaders. I think law will have changed, but hopefully lawyers' roles will not have. So adopt that and wear it proudly.
Hey, Lauren, thoughts?
I agree. I don't think that you should feel that going to law school was, you know, the wrong decision, or going into the legal field is the wrong decision. I think that I mean, personally, working for an insurance defense firm right now, people need, you know, money, and they are making insurance claims. So we are keeping busy. I don't think that that will necessarily change in the next couple of years, or until we're well past the pandemic. I think that people will always need lawyers, and they will, I think, like we have said before, if you expand your skill set and expand your knowledge, and you're able to do a lot of different things for the law firm, so you can work in many practice areas, but you can also, like Ray said, work, you know, help with technology, or just help with anything in general. Just always be available and willing to help and learn how to best help whatever employer you're working for. I think that would serve people very well.
Great. Last word from you.
Yeah, I would just add, don't be discouraged. Obviously, this isn't what you thought it would be. It isn't what I thought it would be, but I'm having fun. You know, I'm learning a lot, and just rolling with everything that comes along. You know, there's lots of work to be done, and like I said, it may be done in a different manner than you thought, but it's important work. And for your clients to come to you, these issues are probably the most important thing in their life at that moment, you know, in some cases. So, you know, take that with the respect that it deserves. I mean, you're going to work hard. You're going to work hard to pass the bar. You're going to work hard to build your network and find a job. And, you know, I would just take some time every now and then to think about how hard you work, and, you know, look back on it with this kind of respect that it deserves. You know, it's important, and I would, I guess, just make my last word a word of encouragement. And you know, I know that when I decided to go to law school, there were people in my life that told me, you know, there's so many law schools, so many lawyers, and you know, it may not be the smartest move. It's not necessarily an emerging, you know, profession, things like that, but I completely disagree. And like I said, I think it's one of the most important jobs in our society, and taking that upon yourself to represent others, I think is really important. So stay the course, and look forward to getting out there and practicing.
Excellent. Thank you all for that advice. Professor Siegel, any parting words or thoughts from you?
So I would just thank all of our panelists and thank the students who attended. And I really I want to just echo one thing that the panelists were saying, and in response to that question, that it's a period of uncertainty, political uncertainty or financial uncertainty, health uncertainty, and lawyers thrive in uncertainty, right? I mean, that's really where people need lawyers most and come to lawyers. So in terms of sort of like job security, I wouldn't worry about that from uncertainty. But I think the other thing that's really maybe a more serious point is that lawyers are trained, and I know that Professor Hansen and I do this, and I know our colleagues do as well. They're trained to try and see things from multiple perspectives. They're trained to try and be able to put themselves in other people's shoes and assess things from other people's views. And I just really think that that's, at this moment, I mean, I don't want to, be sort of global, but at this moment in our country's history, that's an extremely valuable skill. And it's something that is, I think, is maybe kind of gone. I don't want to say it's gone out of fashion. Maybe there are other historical trends that have driven it out of fashion, but that's a really useful skill. And it will, I mean, as Bill was saying, that you're going to be leaders, it's going to be useful for the rest of your life. And it's particularly publicly useful, I think, now. So I think it is something, I think, to be hopeful and serious about.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you all very much. Panelists, thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your insights with us. Students, we appreciate your attending. We'll have some events in the spring that Professor Siegel and I are working on, so stay tuned for announcements for some events in the spring. But this was a great way to kick off this program for this year. And best to everybody. Have a good weekend, and please stay safe and healthy. And we'll be in touch. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.